I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in a very dark, bleak, gray, cloudy, sunless, rainy Budapest. Bleak doesn't even begin to describe it. It's been day after day of murky, dismal days. So spring, which I celebrated last week. For once I said, hey, I've got nothing negative to say about life here. It's gone AWOL, and now we've got the usual bleakness that prevails everywhere. On the positive note, thank you very much, everybody who has joined me, and really appreciate it. It's that time for our Tuesday live stream, and it's been quite an eventful day today. So we had President Trump announcing that he's not going to bomb the Houthis anymore. He said, "That's it. We're going to bomb." He said that the Houthis have surrendered, and effectively immediately there's to be no more bombing of the Houthis. Well, there are interesting aspects of this. First of all, Israel was not notified about Trump's imminent announcement. To be sure, the Houthis have not confirmed that there is indeed I suppose, effectively a ceasefire, since Trump says the Houthis have said that they will not bomb shipping in the Red Sea anymore. And Trump said, well, that's good enough for me. But the Houthis haven't said anything along those lines. But Israel was not notified about this. And it's also very interesting that the announcement of the cessation of the bombing comes on the same day as Israel is bashing the Houthis. Is bombing and bombing and bombing. They were bombing the Sana'a International Airport today. Israel, oh, we've taken it out. The airport is now useless. So when asked, does this apply to Israel, this ceasefire? It was made clear, it was certainly by Tammy Bruce, the State Department spokesperson. It was made clear that no, this ceasefire only pertains to the navigation of the Red Sea. I think Marco Rubio also said that we are only concerned with the Red Sea. That's our only beef with the Houthis. We're not involved in the Israel Houthi missile exchanges. So just as Israel is pummeling the Houthis in Yemen, Trump announces, well, that's it, we're not going to do anything because we, the Americans, are only interested in the navigation of the Red Sea, and the Houthis have given us their word that they're not going to attack the ships. Well, we'll obviously we'll see about that. Nonetheless, it's yet another piece of evidence that Trump is distancing himself from Israel. And incidentally, the negotiations, so there were negotiations that had taken place between the United States and the Houthis. These negotiations were once again handled by Steve Witkoff. And that means, again, all the key foreign policy is being handled by Trump's loyal, trusted aide, Steve Witkoff. But the fact is that, again, Israel is not determining U.S. foreign policy. Then everyone wants to say, oh, everything's being handled by Israel. Netanyahu is doing everything. It's clearly not. Netanyahu has now made 2 visits to the White House, demanding that the United States join Israel in the bombing of Iran. Twice, Netanyahu was told that it's not going to happen. Um, Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, was plotting behind Trump's back. At least that, going by the newspaper reports. The newspaper reports are obviously based on leaks from the White House. That Waltz was conniving with Netanyahu behind Trump's back to join in a bombing attack on Iran. And Waltz paid for it with a very swift demotion. He's not. He's gone. I mean, he's now going to be at the United Nations, where essentially you do nothing. You just put your hand up whenever your bosses in Washington tell you to put your hand up. In this case, he's going to have to do as Marco Rubio tells him to do. So with this announcement, again, the United States is distancing itself from Israel. This is another humiliation, I think, for Netanyahu, because it comes on the day that Israel is pummeling the Houthis. So suddenly Israel is not, part of the equation. And this, incidentally, after the Houthis managed to land a missile. They managed to break through the Israeli air defense or anti-ballistic missile defense system, managed to break through and hit a target near Ben Gurion Airport. So that's kind of a humiliation for Israel. So I think that's quite an interesting development. Now, next week, Trump will be in Saudi Arabia. This is going to be his first foreign visit, just as during his first term, his first foreign visit was to Saudi Arabia. And almost certainly, when he's there, he will be told, because he's going to, I think, visit some other Gulf states. He's going to be told that you got to do something about Israel. This can't go on. You're losing friends here. This is not good. And Trump will not be visiting Israel. So this is a very, very interesting. Now, I think as we said before here at the Gaggle, when it comes to Israel, for Trump, he really does not. He's not interested in the Palestinians. He just thinks that they're just a nuisance. They're not there. That's the only thing that he's prepared to give something to Israel, which is pretty much whatever you want to do. Just you can do it, as long as you don't involve the United States in this. And I think so. If you want to start moving Palestinians out, as Netanyahu seems to be suggesting he intends to do in Gaza, you're going to have to do it yourself. You're going to have to work it all out yourself. But on other issues, whether it's Iran, whether it's the Houthis, Israel is not going to call the shots. So this announcement caught the Israelis by surprise, just as when Netanyahu was last in the Oval Office, Trump's announcement of imminent nuclear talks with Iran caught Israel again by surprise. So it's kind of rather interesting developments. Now, the the other developments today, it's been quite an eventful day, was the vote in Germany, the Bundestag, for Friedrich Merz. And as you probably have heard, Friedrich Merz, the leader of the Germany CDU, failed to win on the first round of the ballot. It's never been done. Never happened before in Germany that an incoming government failed to secure a majority on the first vote in the Bundestag. This was really, of course, very humiliating for Merz, and they did do a do-over later on in the day, and Merz got through, not very impressively, but he managed to get the required majority. Now, you have to say right away that Merz is an extremely unpopular, unlikable future chancellor. He always was. He was, he was way back in the day. He was essentially a shoe-in to lead the CDU, but he was beaten by Angela Merkel. So that was, so that, you're talking about a generation ago, about 25 years ago, I think. And then Merz kind of left politics, went off to make some money at BlackRock, and that's what he is. He's a hedge fund manager. He won very, very unimpressively, and sorry, there's a Carlo Canama says, George and Peter, you two are very smart, but you are also Trump apologists. It's tiring hearing you remark on a wow factor of Trump and Miller without discussing why they need to be stopped. Well, I don't know why. I'm not sure I agree that they need to be stopped, but I think it's a little unfair to Peter, because I think I am more open to Trump's agenda, or at least what Trump is trying to do, than I think Peter is. I think Peter is definitely not a Trump apologist. I think, as you can see from our exchanges, so you can level that criticism at me, but I think it's a little unfair to Peter. But I mean, again, I don't think I'm an apologist. However, that doesn't mean that he's not doing interesting things. He's a kind of a very interesting, radical political figure, and I think one has to acknowledge when somebody's doing something interesting, and things that I think needed to be done years and years ago. But anyway, we'll come to that later. So to return to Merz. So he comes back in politics, but really when Merkel announces that she stepped down as leader of the CDU, and then eventually she stepped down as chancellor. So you think he comes back, and then finally gets the job. He's already not a young man by the time he does this, and then of course he runs a really lousy campaign. So the election that was held in Germany in February, the CDU did very poorly. I mean, they did come in first, but really, really badly. I mean, did considerably worse than even the polls were suggesting. And then, of course, the Social Democrats did terribly. I mean, this is the great Social Democratic Party, the famous party, the party that was outlawed by Bismarck. Can you imagine, they were once such a formidable force that the great Bismarck was forced to outlaw them. So it's the same party, and now they were down to about 16% of the vote. And what happens is essentially, well, there's no real change at the top. The Social Democrats continue to be in government. I mean, it's just as they were before the election. And then there's the once again you have the grand coalition of the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. But the irony of it all is that what they call the grand coalition really isn't particularly grand anymore, because the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats no longer dominate the German political scene. But in any case, so he wins this very unimpressively. Um, and then, almost immediately after the election, he having promised during the election, he thought he was going to sideline the Alternative für Deutschland. He's going to sideline that by promising to be tough on immigration. This is the go-to tactic of all conservative parties in Europe in particular, which is during the election, you start hammering on immigration. You're going to, absolutely, you're going to bring immigration under control. You're not going to allow any more immigration. You're going to get tough on the border, and blah, blah, blah. And then after the election, you said, yeah, well, we didn't really mean it. And of course, he did exactly that. The very day after the election, he said, well, I didn't really mean it. No one should have just expected me to say, yeah, we're going to close the border. Of course, we're not going to close the border. So, that of course lost him, even more support, and then he and the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, using the old parliament, not even the new parliament, not the post February election parliament, but the old parliament. They essentially amended the constitution on the issue of the debt break, and because the debt break meant essentially that they had to keep the debt to a very 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 limited number. And so they did the debt break but what they did very craftily with this constitutional amendment is that money that's spent on the military doesn't count as debt. So you can keep running up a debt, but it doesn't really count as debt. And so this was the change that they affected. And essentially, this Merz, who is promising, European, defense autonomy, Europeans have to now, take up the reins of their defense. They can't, we can't rely on the Americans anymore. Americans, they're unreliable. And so he, Merz, like Ursula von der Leyen, the Christian Democrat, is promising this massive increase in German military expenditure, and is going to be financed by debt. Now, this isn't particularly popular in Germany because, of course, if you run up a debt, you're going to have to find some way to pay it. And that, of course, does lead to inflation. It's something the Germans worry about a great deal. They have a painful history. They never forget the inflation of the 1920s and then the rise of Hitler in the following decade. So when Merz promises to finance this burst of military expenditure out of debt, that has Germans very worried. Also worrying Germans is that he's very, very belligerently anti-Russian. I mean, he really has this Russophobia. I mean, many Germans have that. And, over the years, particularly in the years after World War II, but particularly during the détente Ostpolitik years, all that was tempered. They restrained their innate Russophobia, but that's those days have gone, and Germans now make very little pretense that they don't bear a deep animus towards Russians. And he, Merz, along with Ursula von der Leyen, and along with Annalena Baerbock and the rest of them, does indeed bear an animus towards the Russians. Now, that's a kind of a problem because while there's without doubt this Russophobia in Germans, there are also strong views among other Germans that they don't want to get involved in a war against Russia. And there's more and more of this reckless talk in Europe, fueled certainly by the French and by the Germans, of somehow getting into a war with Russia. This is truly insane, but there is a lot of talk like that. That somehow it's now unavoidable. There's going to have to be a war with Russia. And so when you start talking about increases in military expenditures, when you start running up a huge debt without quite explaining how you're going to finance this debt, and then you couple it with a lot of Russophobic talk and a promise to transfer the Taurus missiles. Remember, Sergeant Schultz had said that he wasn't going to transfer the Taurus missiles to Russia, but Merz is saying he's going to do that. When you combine all that, then there is some anxiety about this incoming German chancellor, and I think that was reflected in the fact that he failed to secure, the victory on the first ballot. And that's kind of humiliating. And you have to believe that your fate is sealed when it's that dismal. I mean, it's like when it's like Kevin McCarthy after the 2022 midterms. Now, in his case, admittedly, there were 15 ballots before he got the speakership. But yeah, he got it on I think the 15th vote. He finally got it. But you knew he's not going to be there for long. I mean, if it's that problematic for you to get this job, then you're not going to hold it for very long. And I think something like that is the case with Merz. I don't think this government will survive. I think that, for instance, the issue of immigration will come back to haunt them because I mean, if you think about the Christian Democrats feel the pressure from the Alternative for Deutschland. I mean, that's the rising party, the AfD. It's now the leading party in Germany in a number of the polls. The Christian Democrats clearly feel the pressure from the AfD, so they have to do something. They don't want to get hammered in the next election, so they have to put forward some kind of a tough on immigration package. However implausible, but they have to do it. That's going to bring them into conflict with their Social Democrat partners. Social Democrat partners, they don't want to impose any kind of restrictions on immigration. So that's going to be one source of conflict between the two two coalition partners. And that's why I think that that's going to be a little difficult. Also, the fact that Sergeant Schultz really kept saying no on the Taurus missiles. I mean, he obviously he was all, on board with the whole Ukraine thing and then sent arms and everything else. However, he balked at sending the Taurus missiles for in a way the same kind of reasons that on the left as opposed to on the right, he's feeling pressure from the left. I mean, he was feeling pressure from the Sarah Wagenknecht's party, which is very anti-war. And so if the Social Democrats were to sign off with sending these Taurus missiles to Ukraine, the Social Democrats were in danger of hemorrhaging votes to Sarah Wagenknecht's party, and so that's a danger for the Social Democrats. So just like the Christian Democrats worry on the issue of immigration that they're getting hammered by the Alternative for Deutschland, so the Social Democrats worry about the parties of the left who are very unhappy about sending the Taurus missiles. So if Schultz um, decides I mean, if Merz decides that he is going to send the Taurus missiles, as he has promised to do, that's going to cause rifts within the coalition. I just think this coalition will last about as long as the previous one, the traffic light coalition. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to stay together, precisely because, in a way, the grand coalition really isn't so grand anymore. They don't dominate the political scene, these Christian Democrats or Social Democrats, the way they used to. So they're very vulnerable to attacks on their fringes. So that's why I think Merz happily will not be there. So I was, of course, obviously um, very satisfied with Merz's failure on the first ballot. A little disappointed that he prevailed on the second ballot, but you can't. He's not going to be there, I think, for very long. And the other news item, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, is this election in Romania, and and the victory of George Simeon in as the media presenting, oh, far right, extreme nationalist, blah blah blah, the usual thing. And as I think I said yesterday, one figure who has been strikingly silent about this election outcome in Romania is Viktor Orban, the Hungarian premier, because he normally is always shooting his mouth off about election results in Europe that ostensibly Brussels doesn't like. And particularly when the media have been running with the story that now suddenly there's going to be this block of states in Europe opposing Brussels, Washington policy on Ukraine, and and Orban's silence, not at all welcoming this, goes back to the figure of Simeon. Simeon really he cut his teeth in politics in Romania as essentially an ethno-nationalist, very much opposed to the Hungarians of Romania. As Romania has a very substantial Hungarian minority, a very large chunk of Hungary, historic Hungary, was taken away from Hungary after World War I at the Treaty of Trianon and became a part of Romania, particularly Transylvania. The Hungarians of Romania, essentially they're organized in their own political party. It's like, it's called, I think the Hungarians in Romania Party. And Simeon was very much opposed to that. He really is. He's had issues with the use of Hungarian language, Hungarian schools, and opposed to creation of these ethnically based political parties, which the Hungarians have. So the Hungarians in Romania have had real issues with Simeon, And as a result of that, of course, the Hungarian government has had issues with Simeon and have wanted to have nothing to do with his political party, this alliance of the Union of Romanians, I think whatever it's called, his political party. They said, no, no, we're not going to have any dealings with them in the European Parliament because they are the enemies of the Hungarian people. That was the view of Orban, Fidesz, that says we're not going to form any kind of coalition because they are enemies of the Hungarian people. Um, so um, he Simeon really he in the election in December, the one that was won on the first round by Georgescu, Simeon only came fourth. He didn't do particularly well. What he did this time was align himself completely with Georgescu. He essentially there was he saw what happened. Georgescu clearly a grave injustice had been done to him. He was on the brink of winning in December. The election was cancelled on a spurious, ridiculous reason. And then he was prevented from running in the replay. In May, he was arrested, and then the court said, "Oh, he's ineligible to run," without ever providing any real explanation why he was ineligible to run. So, that clearly, Simeon very shrewdly campaigned with him and put out hints that he would have Georgescu in his government, or even he would appoint Georgescu as prime minister. It's not really clear to what extent the Romanian president can actually do that. You need a parliamentary majority to do that. So, just simply appointing him prime minister wouldn't really be feasible. But in doing that, clearly, Simeon won very comfortably, won 41% of the vote. So having come in fourth back in December, he wins very easily this time because he identifies with Georgescu. But there's a real problem here, which is, well, is he really someone who is going to assert Romanian independence, Romanian freedom from NATO demands, or is he just doing what conservative politicians do? They play all kinds of little games, getting people worked up, and then after the election, they forget all about it. He Simeon talks about restoring Romania to its pre-1940 borders. So though part of Romania, after during the time of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Romania was forced to cede Bessarabia and Bukovina to the Soviet Union, and of course, since the Soviet Union came out the winner of the war, then those territories became part of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, subsequently, they became part of the independent state of Ukraine and the independent state of Moldova. So essentially, he's making claims on territory which is part of Ukraine and which is a part of Moldova. So he's banned essentially from going to either country because of that. It's not because of NATO or anything like that. The war. It's because of his argument that these pieces of territory belong to Romania. Now, of course, all that is real nonsense because no one's going to tolerate Romania taking taking Moldova or taking a part of Ukraine. I mean, a lot of people talk total nonsense about how Hungary is going to take Transcarpathia from Ukraine and Romania is going to. None of that is going to happen. Poland's going to take Galicia. This is rubbish. This was put out by these kinds of internet frauds who want to get people very excited about how Ukraine is going to be carved up among Russia and Poland and Hungary and Romania. None of that's going to happen. But the point is that when it comes to the issues that matter to Brussels, and that is supporting NATO's agenda, spending money on your military, he's all for that. He said, well, Romania, is not anti-NATO. We're pro-NATO. We're going to continue, supporting NATO goals. My hero is Donald Trump. So he's saying, Trump. I really like Trump. Like make Romania great again. It's like Trump. And so Trump. But which part of Trump do you like? Well, Trump, who says, everybody's going to spend a lot more on their military. So they said, 5% on their of their GDP goes to military. And he says, yeah, okay. So he essentially isn't in any way in the way of NATO's goals in Ukraine. So there's a lot of excitement that he's going to somehow stop the transshipment of arms to Ukraine. He's not said that he's going to do that, and he's not going to stop. He's not going to stop doing that. He's essentially. What the Americans are now doing, they're building their biggest military base in Europe, in Romania. This is what they're doing. And, Trump goes along with all of that. And, Simeon isn't in any way going to hinder that. And it's interesting that he has said that his hero is Giorgia Meloni. Now, that's very interesting because Giorgia Meloni is nothing if not a pragmatist. If you recall, when Meloni won her election in Italy, I think September 2022, there was a lot of excitement. The fascists are coming, Mussolini is back in power in Italy. And then lo and behold, nothing would ever happen. And she quickly made her peace with Ursula von der Leyen, so much so that, if you look on the internet, with the two of them together, like, hey, two gals together cackling and drinking cosmopolitans. That's what that's pretty much their relationship. So the fact that he says, well, my hero is Giorgia Meloni, would suggest, first thing I'm going to do is make my peace with Brussels. Having decided to run on the coattails of Georgescu, who I think did pose a challenge to Brussels. I think he was threatening to pursue an independent Romanian foreign policy. With somebody like Simeon, with all this silly ethno-nationalism, picking fights with the Hungarians, well, Brussels is happy with that. That's great. Piss off Orban a little bit more. Make life a little harder for the Hungarians of Romania. So that's always what Brussels like. Brussels likes to pit one nation against another, one ethnic group against another. And so I think they're quite happy with Simeon. I haven't seen any real, panic uh, about Simeon. So I think people are getting a little excited. They think, oh, that there's going to be a new block of states in Europe opposing the foreign policy on Ukraine. I don't think so. I don't see any real possibility of an alliance between Simeon's Romania and Orban's Hungary. Um, and all right, let's take a look at our locals page, and then we can talk about other things. Oh yeah, and one other thing is, which also happened today, was of course Mark Carney was in D.C. And Trump yesterday was saying that, oh, Mark Carney's, yeah, he's going to come and see me. He got in touch and he said he wanted to see me. I don't know what he wants to talk to me about. And then he sent out a truth later in the day, no, I think first thing this morning, saying, we're getting ripped off by Canada. There's a huge trade deficit with Canada, and he's just saying that, I don't why are we getting ripped off by them? We give them a trade deficit, and essentially we underwrite their defense, so they don't really contribute anything to their own defense because they've got us to look after them, and we run a trade deficit with them. And then he did his usual thing. They don't have anything that we want. We've got everything that they want. But and then of course he did the thing. And Carney said today that well, Canada is not for sale. Not now, not ever. And then Trump's riposte was, never say never. But there is still the issue as to why Trump particularly wants Canada. I don't quite get it. It's a country of 40 million. I mean, what advantage does America get from getting 40 million Canadians into the country? Yes, I mean, I can see demographically, but Canada isn't demographically so white anymore. I mean, if you said, okay, 40 million white people, I can see why Trump might think, oh, that's good. We're going to get 40 million white people into our add them to our population. But Canada has been running a very liberal, radical, open immigration policy for years now. I mean, just look at the debates when the Canadian Parliament. I mean, this is far from being a kind of an all-white parliamentary chamber. I mean, you see all these turbans. One turban. They brought a lot of Sikhs in. So if Trump thinks that he's going to bring in a whole bunch of white Anglo-Saxon types, which maybe he still thinks that's what Canadians are, these sort of white Anglo-Saxons, so then I think he's mistaken. But the other thing is, of course, that they, if you're going to bring Canadians in, you're bringing in a whole bunch of liberals, very, very liberal. They're to the ones who are white Canadians. These are white liberals, the very people who absolutely loathe Trump. I mean, he himself acknowledged that the people who voted for Carney, they don't like Trump. I mean, even Pierre Poilievre, which again Trump acknowledged, Poilievre, he hates me more than even Carney does. And that's the thing. You're going to bring in, all these people. You're going to secure forever a democratic majority. This is going to be a liberal, democratic continent. they have nothing to do with the sort of the core of MAGA, either um, whether it's his electoral base, which is down in the south, or kind of the sort of working class, well, middle class Americans, factory workers, essentially low, middle income people who have identified themselves with Trump. I mean, these Canadians look down upon them. Can you imagine if any of these people? What Carney or Trudeau thinks about these people going around with their MAGA hats? I mean, you saw how Trudeau dealt with the truckers. That's the ruling ethos in Canada. So I don't know that the United States gains anything from getting Canadians into the country. I think you basically will put the final nail in the coffin of a kind of a permanent MAGA majority in the United States. So I mean, as we were talking about yesterday, I mean, if say Alberta decided to secede, or from Canada, or maybe Saskatchewan, or British Columbia, um, okay, maybe on an individual basis, United States can think about bringing them into the United States. I'm not even sure that makes a great deal of sense, but at least you can discuss it. Um, but the whole of that country, bringing it into the United States, that doesn't make a great deal of sense. Um, but so anyway, let's take a look at our locals page. These what the people who who provide sustenance to the dogs, because the dogs really, they get very, very miserable, and they look at the tip jar, and then they immediately turn their rage at me over the condition of the tip jar. So their lives are kind of rather miserable, and so uh, so really appreciate the Gagglers who decide, well, we got to keep these dogs, just get the take them off George's throat. That's the most important thing. Anyway, Judy Hotchkiss. Judy, thank you very much as always for your generosity, for your always interesting, intriguing observations. Judy says Iranian media reports that Witkoff will be in Oman Sunday for restarting talks with Iran. Are Trump's maximalist demands an opening bluff for the new round of talks so serious? How much is the Houthi pause related? I have to think that it is related. This was quite a startling announcement from Trump, really, and particularly he's talking about this the visit that he's making next week. And if you look at the comments that he makes about Iran, there's without question there is a certain ambiguity, and enough of a enough flexibility that a deal is possible. Because if you look at the interview he gave to um, Kristen Walker of NBC, he said, "Okay, complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program." And then she said, "Well, you mean the civilian nuclear part?" And said, "Yeah, they don't really need it. They don't need. They got plenty of oil, so they don't really need the civilian nuclear program. What do they need it for?" So, but then as he continued, he said, "Well, his only uh, condition, the only goal that he's pursuing, is that Iran can't have any nuclear weapons." But that's a very different issue. I mean, if Iran can't have any nuclear weapons, Iran has made clear innumerable times that it has no intention of developing nuclear weapons. Tulsi Gabbard, and he obviously respects her, she's his director of national intelligence, has said there's no evidence that Iran is seeking nuclear weapons. Then that would be sufficient. There's enough of a basis here. He can say that here's the JCPOA, but this time it will be stricter than the old JCPOA. They say, that the level of enrichment that Iran will be permitted will be even lower than the level under the JCPOA. Um, that obviously all enriched uranium will be shipped out immediately, presumably to Russia. I mean, that's what happened under the old JCPOA, including all of the enriched uranium that Iran is currently holding. And then he can reduce the number of centrifuges there, so that fewer centrifuges are going to be allowed than under the old JCPOA. So there is definitely a basis there for an agreement. And so when he says, complete dismantlement, and then he segues into essentially saying, well, the only thing that he's concerned with is no nuclear weapons. Complete dismantlement, he doesn't have a deal. If he doesn't have a deal, then he's kind of he's boxed in, and he would probably have to start bombing. If he starts bombing, that's likely to be very inconclusive. Unlikely that he's going to destroy all of Iran's nuclear facilities. But I think once he starts bombing, then Iran will almost certainly make a decision to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Then they say that we have no alternative but to do that, because we're continually under direct threat from the United States and Israel, so we have no real choice but to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and then obviously develop our nuclear weapons. So if that happens, then Trump will have failed, and Trump knows he will have failed. I mean, if the end result of this process will be that Iran will move towards becoming a nuclear power. So right now, Iran isn't a nuclear power, as told to him by Tulsi Gabbard. And if we go down this process of bombing, then Iran almost certainly will be a nuclear power. So I think it doesn't make any sense for Trump. So what happened today with the Houthis is Trump again distanced himself from Israel. Israel was caught unawares of this announcement by Trump. He did it on a day when Israel was bombing the Houthis. So he's essentially saying, "We're out of here. We're not going to attack the Houthis anymore." Just as the Israelis are bombing the Houthis. So in other words, Israel is on its own against the Houthis. And it's the same thing with Iran. He caught Netanyahu off guard when he visited. Netanyahu had no warning that Trump was going to announce that about the upcoming talks in Oman. So I'd have to think that these are serious talks. I don't believe Iran would continue with talks which have no purpose to them. I mean, if the talks with Witkoff and they're really just talking about nothing, then there'd be no point to them. So I have to think that they're talking seriously. Now, Trump did tease something out today in his meeting with Carney. He said that there's going to be some big announcement in the coming days, and he said, "Well, that'll be really good news." Now, I don't know what that. No one really knows what he's referring to. Trump's very good at getting people very excited. What is this big announcement going to be? But maybe something along those lines. So I haven't given up on this. I don't know. I don't know if anyone watched the uh, crosstalk from last Sunday, where I think I consistently, as against Mark Sloboda, um, basically said I don't think it's. I think it's premature to write Trump off. Um, that I think it's no final decisions have been taken either on Ukraine or on Iran, and so that Trump is irrevocably set on a particular course. I think these talks in Iran are going forward, and there's no there are no downsides for Trump in getting an agreement with Iran because yeah, Israel will yell and shout and whatever. But Obama showed that he can just ignore Netanyahu stomping his feet in rage. When the Americans want it, they can ignore Israel. You know, um, uh, Obama did it. Trump can easily do it, as he showed. That when it comes to anything that matters to the United States, the United States will ignore Israel. So, um, and if he gets a deal, then he's got an agreement. If he doesn't have an agreement, then things just drag on and on and on, and then things get worse. And Trump Trump really doesn't like bombing. I mean, that's not who he is. He's not a John McCain type. He's not. He doesn't get off on bombing some country or other. I think he does like the idea of deals, and he is primarily a domestic affairs president. I think that's where his interest lies. So um, I think that he can he can get an agreement and say, hey, I've got a better deal than Obama had. And what are people going to say? I mean, they say, oh, you're betraying Israel, and it's not a very plausible argument. He's betraying Israel, and the Democrats can't very well attack him since they had supported, with some caveats, but they had supported Obama's JCPOA. So to me, it makes sense for him to go ahead with it. And Witkoff being there, and then Witkoff was involved in this with the Houthis. I have to think that there's a connection here. Anyway, thank you so much, Judy, as always. Anne Marie, always good to see you. Thank you, as always, Anne Marie. Anne Marie is our musical expert. I mean, she's a distinguished professional musician, and she very kindly left a note on the Gaggle Music Club because we played Sibelius's First Symphony, and Anne Marie is happily a big fan of Sibelius. So really appreciate the fact that Anne Marie that you liked it. I'm a big fan of Sibelius. Is one of the truly outstanding composers. Uh, you know, in the Western repertoire. So anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. Carlos says, Carlos, do you think Monty Python's Life of Brian would be a good Gaggle movie? Um, uh, so it would be a good Gaggle movie. Yeah, I think so. But I'd like to see in what way. I mean, I'd like to do a kind of a poll uh, with a theme. What would be? I don't know what the theme would be. A satire, um, religion and humor, something like that. But it would certainly be a good a good film to show. But if you can come up with an idea of I want to put it in a poll with against some other movies. Now, whether you think it's something to do with religion or with humor, satire, and whatever. So, um, but I think that would be entertaining. I mean, obviously, at the time, and I remember when the film came out, uh, so a lot of people didn't like it, and and probably you can find on YouTube um, the time when I think Michael Palin and John Cleese. I'm not sure it was John Cleese. Michael Palin, one of the Monty Python. So I know I think Michael Palin was one of them, and maybe it was Graham Chapman. But they were in a debate against Malcolm Muggeridge and I think the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time. Maybe it wasn't the Archbishop, but some important Archbishop. And Muggeridge and the Archbishop hated the movie, and it was kind of an amusing um, uh, argument about it. Uh, that, that I mean, but um, and so it did cause um, a considerable uh, distress at the time, and but I remember one of the points that came up is that somehow during this debate is that that they were making fun of Jesus, and then whether it was Chapman or Palin said, well, no, we it's made clear in the film that this isn't Jesus. This is that they made a mistake. That this Brian was not Jesus, and that this was that he was the wrong person. He was identified as Jesus, but he's not Jesus. Um, so they were careful not to uh, be too offensive when they did it. But yeah, I think that would be entertaining. So Marty, you're a master of discovering footage. I'm sure you can discover this debate between Muggeridge, this Archbishop, and the two Monty Python characters on the life of Brian. Anyway, thank you, Carlos. Marks 2023 says, George, you were bullhorned on the Bullhorn Show. The great Marks Swoboda spelled it out. Ukraine, Gaza, Yemen are all Trump wars. The tariff mess, all down to Trump. Judge Trump on his first term. Mark gets A star plus for his true words. George, you get a D minus for your poor understanding of Trump and the tariffs. Oh, thank you, Marks 2023, for that very thoughtful and sophisticated comment. Well, obviously you're entitled to your views. My views are just as I spelled it out a moment ago. It is ridiculous at this stage to start making any kind of characterizations of what Trump's foreign policy will end up as being, how Trump's tariffs will work out. The problem is that too many people are filled with this hatred, either for the United States or for Donald Trump. And that prevents them really from seeing things in any rational, factual basis. You don't have to like the United States. I'm no fan of the United States. I lived there for many years. I'm not a fan of it. I've been very critical. Just read my book, Bums for Peace, about United States policy. However, you also have to see that there are differences. There are clear differences within the United States leaders. Donald Trump clearly came along with a different agenda. If he hadn't, there wouldn't have been such a huge effort to prevent him from becoming president, both before his first term and then afterwards. He was impeached twice. There was an enormous attempt to keep him off the ballot and so on. So obviously he is shaking things up. Now, the point about Ukraine D minus. Thank you for my D minus. The point about Ukraine is, and I've said this many times, Russia has not won this war. Russia has had more than 3 years to win this war. Hasn't done it. Russia has not accomplished its objectives. As a result of which, Russia has no interest in the ceasefire that Donald Trump proposed. Now, understandable, it's perfectly understandable Russia has no interest in the ceasefire. But how is that Trump's fault? Trump wants to bring this war to an end, and he says, well, okay, let's bring it to an end. Let's have a ceasefire on the basis of the current line of contact. Let's just have a ceasefire. That's a perfectly rational position for Trump to take. And the Russia says, well, we can't do it because we haven't accomplished our goals. So you've had more than 3 years and you haven't accomplished your goals. Okay. Then the question arises, well, when are you going to accomplish your goals? Well, nobody knows. Now, the problem is that this is not Trump's fault. This is Russia's fault. If Russia had achieved its goals, if Russia at the very minimum had secured the liberation of the 4 oblasts, then it wouldn't have been a problem. Trump could have proposed the ceasefire, and Russia would have said, yeah, all right, we'll have a ceasefire, and then because that would at least be in conformity with Putin's ceasefire demands from June 2024 when he spoke of the Russian foreign minister. He said if Ukraine withdraws from the 4 oblasts and Ukraine gives up on membership for NATO, we'll give them the ceasefire. But you can't expect Donald Trump to get the Ukrainians out of the 4 oblasts. Why should Donald Trump do for Russia for what Russia hasn't done for itself? Why should he do it? He's not the president of Russia. He hasn't been elected by the Russian people. He's America's president. As America's president, he's doing what he promised to do. He said, I'm going to bring up this war to an end. But he never said, well, I'm going to get the Ukrainians out of their 4 oblasts, because it's not within his power, and it's not even within his jurisdiction. And why should he do this? I mean, it may be desirable. I'd be very happy to see the Ukrainians out of those 4 oblasts. I'd be very happy to see them incorporated within the Russian Federation. I think, great, fine, it's within the Russian Federation. I'd be very happy with that. But the fact is that Russia hasn't accomplished this. And it is ridiculous to expect an American president to do for Russia what Russia hasn't done for itself. And this is a very obvious point. There's somehow all these condemnations of Russia, of Trump, but there's a condemnation, and they said, well, why should he do this for Russia? Why should an American president force Ukrainians out of these 4 oblasts when Russia is unable to do it by itself? Now, one could say, well, what about if Russia cuts off, if Trump cuts off all US aid to Ukraine? Maybe you should just do that. Absolutely cut off everything. Boom, cut it all off. Now, leave aside that if he were to do that, he would essentially be, essentially undercutting what America had been doing for some years. We'd be undercutting America's allies and so on. But let's leave that aside. Let's say, fine, do it. Cut Ukraine off from tomorrow on. Leave aside also the fact that nobody ever does it. Nobody ever cuts anything off. Nobody ever just goes cold turkey. But again, let's leave that aside. Let's say Trump does that. Will Russia really win? Will Russia really accomplish its goals? How do you know this? How does anyone know this? Ukraine is now capable of producing quite a lot of the missiles and drones itself. And we know this. Ukraine now has extensive drone factories, and they're producing them on quite an abundant scale. The Europeans also continue to provide arms to Ukraine. Um, Even if Trump cuts them off from all satellite technology, that's it, we're not providing you with any more satellite intelligence. The Europeans have some satellite technology, they can provide that. There are commercial satellites, the Ukrainians could use that. It's not the same, it definitely will not be the same as having the Americans do this. But it still doesn't necessarily deliver this victory for Russia. And that's what ultimately it always boils down to. The people who are condemning Trump is, well, why doesn't he deliver a victory for Russia? Why doesn't he just simply go ahead, pull the plug on Ukraine and let Russia win? Never really answering the question, well, why should he do this? I mean, I may want to see this happen, but I'm trying to analyzing and I'm trying to understand the thinking of an American president, as somebody who has just won an election in the United States. He won an election in the United States of bringing peace to Ukraine. He didn't win an election by saying, I'm going to deliver 4 oblasts for Russia. Never said that. He never promised that he was going to do that. So that's why I try to point out that you can't expect an American president to act as if he is the president of Russia. And I think too many people identify their cause with the cause of Russia for whatever reason. With a dislike for Trump, dislike for America, and so on. All perfectly reasonable sentiments. But they don't answer the question as to why would Trump do this. Now, Trump has moved the ball quite a long way. You remember where we were in just in January of this year, during the latter days of Biden. The position of the United States, the position of NATO, was that essentially, restoring Ukraine to its 1991 borders. That the road to NATO membership for Ukraine is open. That all Russian forces must be removed from Ukraine. All of that has been abandoned. Trump has abandoned all of those objectives. So that's already a huge change. NATO off the table. Trump flatly said it's off the table. Ain't going to happen. And it's no longer, oh, well, we're not going to talk about it for the time being. No. He said it's off the table. We're not going to do it. He's already said Ukraine is going to have to give up territory. That's it. He's announced that. So he's moved the ball an enormous amount just in a few months. And so the people who come along and pretend that there's no change, no difference whatsoever, it's all exactly the same. Oh, Biden, Trump, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. They're wrong. They're flatly wrong. He has changed the policy a great deal, and we're only just over 3 months into the administration. Who knows where it's going to go? At the moment, we don't have the ceasefire, but who knows where this is going to go? So, and then you have to say the point. If it weren't for Trump, let's say Trump didn't win. What were the alternatives to Trump last year? Pink Code, one of these Pink Code people. Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky wasn't running in November. I didn't see too many peaceniks running in November. So it was either Trump or Biden or Harris or um, Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley. Do you think any of those people would have gone as far as Trump has in changing America's objectives? So all of these attacks on Trump is that apparently Trump just didn't give up everything. Oh, I'm just going to give up everything and maybe even take Russia's side and start bombing Ukraine. I mean, that's what this really amounts to. And so all this, and we get this from Mearsheimer and all of the rest of them, that this is, they talk about this as if somehow Trump was under some kind of an obligation to take Russia's side against Ukraine, rather than, hey, take what you can get, but in the meantime, and this is what Russia needs to wrap this up. I don't know how many times I said this. I've been saying this since February 2022. I've said this so many times here, and people who have been regular Gagglers. I said Russia needs to wrap this up. Don't start this whole thing. Oh, time is on Russia's side, and time is never on anyone's side. In any war, time is not on your side. Time is always your enemy. Because war is very uncertain. You have no idea how it's going to go. Time is not on your side. Russia needs to wrap it up. Because if Russia were to wrap it up, if Russia were to finally liberate those 4 oblasts, then life would be very easy. Because then Trump would be able to say, okay, let's have a ceasefire now. You've got the oblast, let's have and Trump would be very happy to do it. He would be very happy to say, ceasefire, the oblasts now belong part of the Russian Federation, de facto, de jure, I don't care, here's the ceasefire. But Trump can't do that because they're not, Russia hasn't captured the 4 oblasts. Donetsk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, only about 2/3 or 70% are under the control of Russia. And you can't expect Trump to deliver the 1/3 of his oblasts to Russia. You can't do it. He's the president of the United States. Why would he do it? Anyway, the tariff mess is all down to Trump. Well, what mess? What's the mess? There's no mess. I mean, there's nothing to say it's a mess. The mess is made up of media keep repeating what a disaster the Trump economy is. When one asks, well, what's the disaster? Where's the disaster? Inflation is very low. Number of jobs created, pretty decent. Where's the economic disaster, other than in the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times, who are just repeating it? It's very good. I'm very happy that suddenly, in the page here, or the Gaggle or RT and everywhere else, and the alt media, they're all repeating talking points from the mainstream media. It's so nice. I'm so happy that the alt media has become a venue for CNN talking points, who are telling us about this huge, terrible economic crisis in the United States. And then one says, well, where's the crisis? Oh, because Jamie Dimon said that there might be a recession, or there's a good chance that there's going to be a recession at the end of the year. So if Jamie Dimon said it, then it must be true. Anyway, Marx, I guess, thank you. I'm not sure. But anyway, all right, thanks. Thank you anyway for your comment. Carlos says, I think you should have given Trump a C, not a B. I thought that I wouldn't have given him a C. I just said maybe a B minus. I did think afterwards a B minus would be a better grade than a B. I think it's when Mark said D, but he didn't give a plus or a minus, I kind of took it, okay, I gave him a B. I think a B minus, I think, would have been a better, a more accurate grade. So, it's not a bad grade. But what I tried to emphasize as well is that he's running an ambitious agenda. He's addressing problems that America should have addressed years ago. I mean, dealing with the universities, the law firms, the sort of vast infrastructure of civil society programs and think tanks and foundations and all of that that ensures a liberal political culture. And that liberal political culture in the United States and elsewhere, and even worse in Europe, that liberal political culture ensures that it doesn't matter who wins an election. They have limited impact. They hang around for 4, 8 years, and then they're gone. But the liberal political culture remains. And since these universities, and particularly these are wealthy, powerful institutions who essentially are in the business of funneling money, funneling taxpayer money to their political allies. But that's what they do. They're funneling their money to their political allies. It was always high time for the government to step in. And it's quite possible. And no one else would have done it. No one else, no other political leader would have had the courage to do that. Nixon, I think, might have tried, but Nixon was then in his second term, but he was almost immediately bogged down by Watergate, and he was just preoccupied with his own political survival, so he couldn't do very much. Reagan didn't even really try, but Trump has seen the problem. He's seen the economic problem. He's seen the cultural problem. He's seen the political problem. Now, will he succeed? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, most people fail. I mean, it's like I can't remember who was it. Somebody was famous said, I think all political careers end in failure. So chances are he'll fail. I can't remember who said all political careers end in failure. But I think it's audacious, and I have to say I rather like it. I view the universities needed cutting down to size. The powerful institutions, they live off huge government donations, even though they are extremely wealthy, and they use these government donations to support their political allies. They don't do anything for their own countries. Most of their most of their graduate students are foreigners who bring in additional cash. So there's no room even for native-born Americans. And again, this applies in Europe as well, particularly in the UK. So they do really very little for the countries that allows them to flourish and get so fabulously wealthy. And I think it was always high time that somebody decided to take on these institutions. And then the law firms, they are the people who really carry power in the United States. All of this, Skadden Arps and Paul Weiss and Spalding and King, or King and Spalding, and these awful, and they needed tackling. So unless you kind of address that issue, unless you address what Trump is trying to do, then I think you're just going to be talking among your friends. I mean, that's it's just you're not really being serious. I mean, yesterday we had the announcements in the Oval Office ending the gain of function research. Well, that's already quite a big move. That's it, once and for all. There'll be no more gain of function research. They flatly said it was the gain of function research done deviously under previous administrations, including Trump's own, because Fauci was doing this surreptitiously during Trump's first term. Gain of function research was funneling money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but the Wuhan Institute was money, taxpayer money, that were creating this humanized mice. I think it was here in North Carolina. They were providing these humanized mice, and these humanized mice were then given to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There was never the slightest scientific benefit to any of this research. And Trump said, that's it, we're not going to do this. These are all things that you have to be positive about. I mean, you just think this is this is a good thing that that a president has done this. And then and you know uh, when when said, oh, when you've got Bernie Sanders, oh, he's helping his billionaire friends. Trump is billionaire friends, is oligarchy. This is the oligarchy. Well, how is Trump helping his billionaire friends? Tesla is getting absolutely hammered, um, and Trump isn't giving any breaks. He's taken away the electric vehicle mandate. His Trump is a fossil fuel person, and he really doesn't particularly like electric vehicles. And then you go, well, how did he reward Mark Zuckerberg? His administration basically they went after Mark Zuckerberg during his first term, and Zuckerberg is now facing the FTC, and Trump isn't giving him any breaks. The FTC will probably win this case against Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg is engaging in antitrust activities, and he's going to have to give up WhatsApp and Instagram. Billionaire. Well, if Trump is supposed to be such a great friend of the billionaires, he's not doing it. Not exactly helping out Zuckerberg. Remember George W. Bush, when he came into office in 2000, he he essentially dropped the government's case against Microsoft because the Clinton administration has gone after Microsoft, and basically they got a favorable ruling from the courts, basically that Microsoft needed to be broken up. You know, all the different parts, all of the software had to be broken up from the operating system, you know, and the browser had to be separate from the operating system. It was, you know, basically, the court ruled reasonably that Microsoft was engaged in anti-competitive practices, as is Zuckerberg. But George W. Bush, unlike Trump, dropped the federal government's case against Microsoft. The cases that are taking place against Google about, you know, the monopoly on advertising, on its Apple, on its app stores, these were all launched by Trump, which are good things. Billionaires. Anyway, Marty. Carlos says Mexico is going to take Texas. Yeah, right. Well, I don't know. I mean, you can take that. Anyway, let's. Where are we? Marty. Yeah, always good to see you, Marty. Thank you so much as always, and always so interested in your in all your contributions. So, but thank you as always for your generosity. And Mark says, D minus George, just like a Mercurius, are both are Trump fanboys. Far too many alt media have been taken by the Trump show. Trump loves it, and he's looking forward to them kissing his big butt. All right, well, you've had your say. Okay, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. I don't think I've in any way been taken in by Trump. I was, in fact, very critical of Trump during his first term. I think he had a lot of opportunities, and if you can go back in time, go to my Twitter feed from during the years 2017 to 2021. I was continually critical of Trump because I thought that Trump had largely failed. I think he was. He promised a great deal during the campaign and really didn't do very much. And so I thought, well, hey, what do I care about them? He said he was going to do this, he was going to do that, but never did. And he appointed people like John Bolton and so on. But that was his first term. I think so far during his second term, he has decided he's going to be different. He's actually going to try and do things. He's got 4 years, and he's going to try and do things. As I say, probably he'll fail. But I think that when somebody tries to do something, and you think, well, this, he's making an effort. I think one should give due credit for that. Okay, he's making an effort. Maybe, probably, he will fail, but he should be commended for doing things that are not easy to do. It's not easy to bring a war to an end. It's not easy to take on powerful institutions, particularly when they have the media in their corner. Um, and even on this question of Russia, I mean, just going back to that, if you look at Trump is almost isolated within Washington, within the United States, on this question of the war in Ukraine. He's one of the few people in Washington who actually wants to bring this war to an end, like today. 99% of everyone, the denizens of Washington, within the media, in the think tanks, among the policymakers, in Congress, they want this war to go on, and they want to escalate American involvement. Other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, I would have said Matt Gaetz, but Matt Gaetz isn't in Congress anymore. Other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's almost no one who's on the Trump's agenda on bringing this war to an end. And this is very different from Vietnam. At the time in Vietnam, by 1969, 1970, it became pretty much a consensus within Washington that America had to end its involvement. So in a way, Nixon was working within a system in which everyone wanted out. But when you're working in a system when everyone wants you in, and on the contrary, to increase your involvement, when you get Lindsey Graham, your political ally, who wants to increase sanctions against Russia, and as he gleefully points out, this proposal to increase sanctions is veto-proof. In other words, he knows that Trump will try to veto any sanctions package against Russia, but basically they've got the votes. They're going to override his veto. Then it's very difficult to just, hey, just snap your fingers and you bring the war to an end. Thank you, Professor John Mearsheimer. Let us listen to his words. How the hell are you going to bring this war to an end just like that? Just by snapping your fingers? And Mearsheimer says this, and all these people sit there. Oh, wow, Mearsheimer, distinguished professor of Chicago. It goes on Napolitano. How the hell are you going to do this? What is the mechanism? As I said, even if Trump were just to cut off all military aid to Ukraine, cut off all satellite intelligence to Ukraine, cut all of it off. And he's going to take the political heat for it and everything else, and he's going to essentially abandon all of the U.S. policy for years and years. But let's say he does all of that. He still can't guarantee that Russia is going to prevail anytime soon. Ukraine has other means to go on fighting. Anyway, so and Marx, thank you. Says Steve Zionist Israel first did say dump Ukraine on day one. Trump is just a figurehead. Project 2025 is being carried out. Okay, who's Steve Zionist Israel? Bannon. Bannon isn't really. I don't think that's quite an accurate characterization of Bannon, because Bannon's first loyalty is to Trump. And Bannon was actually very pissed off when Netanyahu was trying to um, push um, Trump into some kind of an attack on Iran. Yeah, I mean, yes, is he is he a Zionist? Is he pro-Israel? Everybody is. I mean, it's like it's like so. Well, like Trump is pro-Israel or Bannon is, yeah, because everybody is. Everybody is, with the exception of Thomas Massey. Every single person in Washington is a huge fan of Israel. That's just a fact of life. It's not going to just alter. Um, and it's it. So as I say, you know, it's always easy to say, yeah, I should just cut them off. Um, which people said about Nixon. Oh yeah, yeah, just cut it off, cut it off, cut it off. Nobody ever does that. Even De Gaulle, and De Gaulle, this is always the example. Oh, De Gaulle just ended the French involvement in Algeria. It took him 4 years. You think he did it overnight? Oh, you know what? We're just gonna leave Algeria. It took him 4 years to withdraw from Algeria. Um, so nobody ever does that. And as I say, I'm not at all sure that if you cut Ukraine off, that will bring the war to an immediate conclusion. It may. It may, so even if Trump were to say, yeah, okay, we're going to do it tomorrow, I'm not sure that it will have that immediate effect. Yes, will Russia defeat Ukraine? Yes, it will defeat Ukraine. It's 4 times the size of Ukraine. It will defeat Ukraine. Question is, when? When is that going to happen? Carlos says, I'm a permanent resident of Canada. Oh, that's good. If the U.S. annexes Canada, do I become a resident of the U.S.? I would have. Would you become a resident? Yeah, I would have thought so, because then the government of Canada becomes the government of the United States, and so if they've given you a permanent residency, then you'll have a residency in the United States. I would have thought. And if so, should I just move to Florida? Yeah, I think so. That sounds like quite a nice place. Um, I mean, if you can bear the heat. I mean, it does get quite hot there um, in the summer. But I guess what you could do is live there in the fall and winter, and then maybe in the summer, somewhere a little cooler, maybe somewhere in the Midwest, it's more pleasant. Or maybe, preferably somewhere in like Northern California in the summer. But I think Florida does get a little hot in the summer. Uh, Judy says, I think that Trump is ultimately aiming for separating out the western provinces of Canada. I think so. Through secession, annexing them, and next bringing in the Yukon and the Northwest Territory that are contiguous to Alaska in an all-important Arctic region. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's probably his agenda. What I'm not sure about, because as legally, there was that ruling by the Canadian Constitutional Court in 1998. It was apropos of the secession of Quebec. And what the Constitutional Court then ruled is that a referendum in any province that wants to secede from Canada is not determinative. Even if the referendum goes in favor of the secession, even if they get 2/3, 75, 80% in favor of secession, that still doesn't obligate the federal government from recognizing the secession. That there still has to be a negotiation between the seceding province and the federal government. So, in other words, they're saying that everybody else has a say. Every other province has a say in whether a particular province secedes. I think it was a very good ruling, and I was very interested in that because it was very apropos of what happened in Yugoslavia, where um, everybody rushed in to recognize the seceding republics. It was Croatia and Slovenia, and then they extended it to Bosnia and Herzegovina and um, and then Macedonia. And the point was that um, what the Constitutional Court of Canada pointed out is that you can't just unilateral secession is just a non-starter. There has to be negotiation between um, the uh, the secessionists and the federal government, because a relationship has been developed over centuries, in the case of Yugoslavia, over decades between the republics and the federal government. There was a lot of investment that had come in from the government. People had moved from one part of the country to another. There were debts that had to be sorted out. So there are a lot of issues that need sorting out. You can't just have somebody walking away. Just as in a marriage, you can't just have one partner just simply saying, "Well, I'm out of here," and that's all there is to it. There has to be a long, complicated adjudication as to what happens to the joint property, what happens to debts, and so on, who owes what to whom. So I thought that was a good and intelligent ruling from the Canadian Constitutional Court. That was in 1998. So that might still be, that's still the ruling that would apply in the case of Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia or anyone else who wants to um, secede. You have to negotiate. So I don't know how the federal government would operate in those circumstances. Anyway, thank you, Judy. Mark says Iran is happy to talk about nothing while talking no bombing. Okay. And then Mark said, bomb Syria, bomb Yemen. What are you talking about? He bombed Syria in a very desultory way. It was an entirely inconsequential bombing. No, I mean that was a joke. He made sure he gave everyone fair warning, gave the Russians fair warning, made sure all the buildings were empty, and it was a nothing bombing. I mean, this was he didn't do that. Iran, he was urged by Bolton to bomb Iran. He said no, he wasn't going to bomb Iran. He has bombed Yemen, but it's he brought it to an end now. I don't approve of that. I don't approve of his bombing Yemen, but at the same time, it's not really if that's the best you've got. I mean, that's not exactly comparable to what others leaders have done. I mean, if you can't see the difference between that and what Obama did, Obama, who bombed Libya to destruction, Obama, whose bombing led to the murder and rape of Libya's leader and the overthrow of Libyan government, Obama, whose policy led to the overthrow of the Kiev government, um, and of course Obama bombed a number of different countries, including incidentally Yemen, and he was instrumental in starting the war in Yemen. If you can't see the difference between that and Trump, well, there's nothing more I can say. And then so. So anyway, Mark goes on. Russia is doing what it set out to do. Russia never gave a timeline to achieve its goals. All right, well, keep telling me yourself that it's weakened NATO. Well, it's not weakened NATO. Its economy, blah 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 blah. Look, when you embark on a war, the key part of any war is you got to persuade everyone else that you are a formidable adversary. You want to instill fear in others. And the way you do that is you accomplish your goals very quickly. That's always the key. The key in any war, you get everything done very quickly. The longer a war goes on, the more you persuade other countries that you're not really that formidable a power. So if you look, what did people think in 2022? 2022, if you thought, well, Russia will be able to deal with Ukraine pretty quickly because we were all persuaded by much of what Russia had been saying about itself, by Putin and everything else. Now, we're 3 years on, and what do you think the Americans are thinking? What do you really what the Americans are thinking? What do you think Trump is thinking? Trump is thinking, well, Russia's basically hasn't been able to finish this job off. The way you remain a great power is by instilling fear in others and instilling the realization among others that you are not to be messed with. 2024, the Biden administration and the French and the British, though this seems to have come to an end under Trump, they were happily hitting targets inside Russia. That was something inconceivable for anyone to think about doing in previous years. No one would have dreamt in 2022 to start hitting targets inside Russia. Not, this isn't Nixon bombing Soviet ships in Haiphong Harbor. That's in Haiphong Harbor in Vietnam. That's one thing. But to start hitting targets inside Russia, and incidentally, that's still happening. I mean, the Ukrainians are still hitting targets all over Russia with their drones. Drones require satellite technology, and the Americans are providing the satellite intelligence. So they're doing this. That would suggest NATO isn't terribly afraid of Russia. I mean, just apply some common sense. They wouldn't have dared to do this 3 years ago. They do dare to do it now. They're not afraid of Russia. Now, maybe NATO is making a major miscalculation here, and this will end disastrously for NATO. That may be so. But what one can't do is just simply keep banging the drum for Russia when clearly, as far as NATO is concerned, they've been able to drag this war out, minimal losses for NATO, like zero losses, no casualties whatsoever, while Russia has suffered huge casualties. So just have to apply some, common sense. Great powers remain great powers as long as they don't fight wars. That's always the key. Do not fight wars. Wars are debilitating. They drain resources. They drain your manpower. And as long as they're not concluded, there is the danger that they're going to have very unfortunate outcomes. And this war is not concluded, which means there could be all sorts of very unpleasant outcomes possible. All right. Where are we? Joe, I'm repeating a mainstream narrative. All right. So you keep parroting stuff from. All right, Alex. I think I've read enough of your questions today. Robert, it's always good to see you. And Robert says, that's the quote. The quote is from Enoch Powell. I thought it was from Enoch Powell. All political lives, unless they are cut off in midstream at a happy juncture, end in failure because that is the nature of politics and of human affairs. Yeah, I thought that it was Enoch Powell who said this. All political careers end in failure, and I think that's it's really very interesting because it's hard to think of any major political figure from the past that who clearly accomplished many things in their political career that in the end ended in kind of a failure and humiliation. De Gaulle, who kind of is the architect of modern post 1945 France, he ended in that really dismal 1968, which clearly caught him by surprise. He wasn't expecting this sudden uprising against him, and it broke him. So even though he held elections uh, and, uh, and succeeded in winning a substantial majority after 1968, nonetheless he was a broken man, and he left retired the following year. Thatcher dominated British politics really from the time she became leader of the Tory party in 1975 through to 1990. She dominated British politics and then ended in failure. Her own party rejected her, and she was forced to give up her party leadership. Even Churchill, was kicked out by his own cabinet. Bismarck, the great man himself, was unceremoniously booted out by Wilhelm. So it's an interesting. All political careers end in failure. Um, I think I think it's very profound. I mean, and particularly, I think if you try to change things dramatically, you're going to provoke powerful forces against you, and as a result, um, that you probably they're going to be stronger than you are, and they're going to bring you to your knees. Anyway, Robert says, my opinion of Senator Kennedy went down several notches after he said with a straight face, for U.S. to walk away from Ukraine would embolden Putin. Yeah, yeah. Senator Kennedy, I think you mean. Oh, I mean, well, are you talking about the Louisiana Senator Kennedy, um, rather than Bobby Jr. Because Bobby Jr. Um, isn't in the Senate. But yeah, well, to be honest, I've never really thought that highly of Senator Kennedy of Louisiana. That doesn't surprise me at all that he said, if the U.S. walks away from Ukraine, that would embolden Putin. That's the conventional, the consensus view, um, and so. Uh, that So Mark says, George, America left Afghanistan overnight, leaving 1 billion plus in military equipment. Now let's see, overnight. Do you mean the 20 years that they spent in Afghanistan? 20 years. They went in 2021 and they left in 2021. That's not overnight. That's something that you've been there an awful long time, and that was a major commitment. And despite all presidents intending to leave, because no one could ever even explain what the hell the United States was actually doing in Afghanistan. The whole purpose was just to go after bin Laden, to get bin Laden, since that had been accomplished in 2011 when they killed bin Laden, or at least ostensibly they killed bin Laden. Then what the hell was he doing for another 10 years? So that's not exactly an example of anyone withdrawing. Now, in the case of Ukraine, well, okay, fine. You can absolutely say Trump should cut off Ukraine. I'm perfectly down with it. I'd be very happy with it. You should just go ahead and do so. However, unconvinced that that will actually deliver what you and I would want to see happen. I see that in an immediate defeat for Ukraine, which, incidentally, if America was pull the plug and Ukraine went immediately down to defeat, it clearly wouldn't look very good for the United States. But okay, we don't care about that. All we care about is what's good for Russia. Fine, that's a goal. I only care about Russia. Fine. Um, I'm not sure that's going to happen. Ukraine has other means. Ukraine isn't in the situation it was in 2022 when it was wholly dependent on American weaponry. It's producing its own drones, and these drones, they've kind of really transformed this war. I mean, that this war is being fought with drones. They can produce the drones, and if they can find some other means of getting the satellite intelligence, this could go on for a while. So, even if you take the position that the only thing that matters is Russia and the victory for Russia, quite why that should be Trump's goal as an American president, that's a different matter. I'm not sure that even just pulling the plug on Ukraine is actually going to achieve that. Right. Anyway, Europe. Mark says finally, Europe destroyed their economies fighting the proxy war. Well, I'm not sure Europe has destroyed its economies, to be honest. I mean, I think Europe is, they're still there. They haven't lost any lives. I think that's a kind of in the end, that's what matters. Um, Pete Durpan says George looks very healthy. Well, thank you very much. And then it says I think George is playing the devil's advocate. All right, that's all right. Well, I'd like to. That's fair enough. I mean, I think we should always entertain um, interesting. I think, and you try to take arguments to their logical conclusion. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody who's joined us. Um, Robert says the latest drones are particularly nasty, using very thin fiber optic cable that can unspool for tens of miles like a fishing pole line. Yeah, that's what I'm getting, and they seem to be very inexpensive to produce, and they have devastating effect. So everyone seems to be able to produce them, and in quite abundant quantities. So it has clearly transforming warfare. It's like the old way of fighting, which is mass armed formations. It's not very good against drones. So that's why I wouldn't immediately say, oh, all you have to do is cut Zelensky off, and then it's all over. Not sure about that. Anyway, we'll talk about it further at our next live stream. So thank you very much, everybody who joined me. Thank you so much, everybody, especially those who put something into the tip jar, so that I'm going to be able to face the dogs tomorrow. They're getting less and less exhausted, less and less patience with me. They think we've had it, absolutely had it with you. But I'm going to do my best. But thank you so much, and we will be back on Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, thank you. Goodbye. Good luck. See you Thursday. Bye bye. Good night.